Executive Director of the Sing Sing Prison Museum. I'm very happy to welcome you to tonight's episode of Justice Talks. This is an ongoing series of programs that the museum started sponsoring in 2020, and we've had some wonderful guests on this program talking about contemporary issues in criminal justice and also the history of criminal justice. I'm very happy tonight that we're to be co-hosting this event with Bethany Arts Community, and you'll hear more about Bethany Arts in a few minutes. The mission of the Sing Sing Prison Museum is to tell the extraordinary story of 200 years of incarceration at Sing Sing Prison in Ossining, New York. And it's a complex and compelling story. It's also a part of our mission to challenge all of us to imagine a more equitable criminal justice system and build a better society. So we connect history, we use history as a resource to understand our own times. And the arts, performing arts, fine arts, creative people are fundamental in helping us fulfill that mission. The arts shape our understanding of the world and our society. And this is very true of Sing Sing. You can go back into the history of Sing Sing, from Walt Whitman to Warner Brothers to Andy Warhol. The stories of Sing Sing have inspired artists throughout its history. And we're very committed to continuing that tradition. The Board of Trustees in the Sing Sing Museum is governed by a Board of Trustees. Two of our board members, in fact, are on this program tonight, Abby Lewis and Sean Pico. Our Board of Trustees are very committed to supporting the arts, to using the arts as a resource to fulfill our mission and raise awareness and look at the world maybe a little differently. And I think that's what the value of that artists bring in addition to creating beautiful work, whether it's dance or poetry or architecture. Artists challenge us to look at the world differently. The museum sponsored Jo Kreiter's performance of The Weight Room in 2019. Little did we know that the world would change a few months later, but we had a wonderful experience with Jo, and it's really great to have her performing back in Ossining this year. This past April, we produced a poetry reading program with people who have been formerly incarcerated and who shared their vision of the world through their poetry. And it's a program that is can be accessed on our website, as all the programs of Justice Talks are available on our website. But that one in particular, I encourage you to take a look at. And as we search and develop a new site for the museum, we are determined to have a space within the museum for performance, for theatrical works, for film, lectures, seminars. So the arts are going to be an integral part of the Sing Sing Prison Museum. I'm also delighted tonight that Mimi Pasquale, who is a museum associate with Sing Sing Prison Museum, is a panelist. So we have quite a family gathering here, and I'm really happy to see that. I also want to recognize Nicole Hamilton, who's behind the scenes, who's the production manager for tonight's program. If you have questions or comments and you want to enter them in the chat or the Q&A, please feel free to do that during the program, and we will have time at the end of the program to recognize those comments. I want to mention a couple of upcoming events. Abby Lewis is going to talk extensively about the dance performance that Jo Kreiter is going to be performing, so I won't intrude on that. But we have a webinar coming up in October. Look at our website to get the exact date, but it's about voting and the voting rights of people who have been incarcerated. And then another program that we're really excited about on November 3rd, we're co-sponsoring with the Jacob Burns Film Center a screening of a film that was made 50 years ago called Thanksgiving Sing Sing 1972. This was a concert that took place at Sing Sing with Joan Baez and B.B. King and a number of other great artists, the Voices of East Harlem. And the filmmaker, David Hoffman, will be joining us. It's going to be a very special event. So now I'm delighted to, I should mention, I'm delighted that the museum is not only co-hosting this webinar, but also is sponsor of the performance that Jo Kreiter will be performing in a couple of weeks. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Abby Lewis from Bethany Arts Community. Abby.
Thank you, Brent. Really, really appreciate that, and very grateful for the partnership of Sing Sing Prison Museum in bringing Jo and this whole series of events to life and to Ossining. So thank you for that. As Brent said, just a really quick word about Bethany Arts Community. We are an arts organization in Ossining, New York, in a remarkable space, 44,000 square feet and 25 acres. We have residency programs, galleries, all sorts of studio space, sculpture gardens, and the like. But most importantly, I think, is that the Bethany Arts Community was founded by David Lyons, our founder, really with the belief that the arts enhances our perceptions and perspectives of the world, and a real commitment of, that it can improve people's lives and that we need to lower the barrier of access to the arts. So a deep, debt of gratitude for Bethany Arts Community and what it brings to the community. But we have a lot to cover today. And so I really want to delve right in. I also should just say that my pronouns are she and her. And so let me just start, because you're really all here to hear our panelists today. So it brings me immense pleasure to introduce Jo Kreiter, who's the artistic director of Flyaway Productions. She's a nationally recognized choreographer and site artist with a background in political science. She makes large-scale public art via apparatus based dance. Her work is founded in community collaboration, place, and an intersectional feminist lens. Jo has spent 25 years building coalitions with women marginalized by race, class, gender, and workplace inequities. Noted partners have included SE Justice Group, UC Hastings, Tenderloin Museum, Prison Renaissance, and Tradeswomen, Inc. Her work has been supported by Guggenheim and Rauschenberg Fellowships, New England Foundation in the Arts, and the National Endowment for the Arts. Jo, welcome. So happy to have you here, and so happy to be able to now call you a friend. Sean Pica. Sean Pica is Executive Director of Hudson Link for Higher Education in Prison and Vice President of New Beginnings Transitional Housing, a not-for-profit organization that provides college education, life skills, and reentry support to incarcerated and formerly incarcerated men and women to help them make a positive impact on their lives, their families, and communities. Since taking over leadership of Hudson Link in 2007, he's grown the program from one site serving 60 students to more than 580 students attending college preparatory and college courses in 6 prisons in New York. Hudson Link has awarded 700 college degrees and now provides reentry support for its more than 1,400 released alumni. Sean also serves on the New York State Council on Community Reentry and Reintegration and on the board of directors for the New York State Consortium for Higher Education in Prison and the Sing Sing Prison Museum. I don't think I've ever met anybody who is more driven, and I don't know how we ever get sleep, but incredibly privileged to have you here with us tonight, Sean. Welcome. Next is Gilberto Ramos. So Gilberto was incarcerated at the age of 19, and through hard work and dedication, he obtained his bachelor's degree and master's degrees while incarcerated. And he's now a DOCS reentry enhancement case manager for Exodus Transitional Community. And as I understanding, just like Sean, gives everything to his clients. So Gilberto, welcome. We're glad to have you here. And last, but certainly not least, Minerva Mimi Pascual. So Mimi is a criminal justice activist who considers herself an artivist, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. She serves as a community organizer for the Social Justice Network, as well as College Community Fellowship, where she supports and empowers women who have been impacted by the criminal justice system. She's an associate, as Brent said, with the Sing Sing Prison Museum, where she's been collecting oral histories. She has been involved with the Columbia University Center for Justice and the John Jay Institute for Justice and Opportunity. Mimi, welcome. So again, it's a privilege to have all of you here, but I know that what we want to do now is to jump in and get going on the topic. So what I wanted to do, we have a historic and cultural organization supporting this in the Sing Sing Prison Museum. We have an arts organization. We have an artist. We have Hudson Link for Higher Education. So I wanted to set the context a little bit more about why art matters for those who are involved in this really important work around criminal justice as our society grapples with how we deal with the carceral system, how we improve the carceral system. And so, Jo, let's start with you. From an artist's perspective and your own personal perspective, how do you see the arts and artists impacting the political work of prison reform and abolition?
Thank you, Abby, and thanks to the Sing Sing Prison Museum. I'm really happy to be here with these amazing folks on this panel. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm speaking to you from San Francisco, which is the unceded land of the Ramaytush Ohlone people. To answer your question, I was just asked this as we were performing the piece here in San Francisco, and there's three things that I think about when I think about what artists bring to the table in terms of prison systems change. We are by nature improvisers. We don't sit in rigid thinking, and I think that's a really important aspect of how to create change when we're talking about prison systems accountability and justice. The second thing is that we lead with curiosity, and I think that humanizes how we look at people who have caused harm and been harmed. We are inherently a humanizing force. And thirdly, and Brent mentioned this, is that we traffic in beauty. I would say not all choreographers or experimental choreographers value beauty. Some value chaos and breaking things down. For me, beauty is an aesthetic value that I bring to the theatrical experience, that I bring to people. Working with well-trained line and form and well-educated line and form is as important to me as working as a well-educated activist in the content that I'm bringing to audiences. So beauty invites. The final thing that distinguishes Flyaway particularly, and we are not just me, we are a group of collaborative artists, is that we traffic in spectacle. We wow you. We bring you in, we make you wonder, how do they do that? How do they train for that? How does that happen? And to me, that opens the door to new ways to wonder about the issues.
I love that. I often say to a lot of these conversations, you know, while I hope people come to the conversation for the right reason, if they come to the conversation for spectacle or for something else, they've at least come. And that's an opportunity to engage them, which is wonderful. So Mimi, for you, as somebody who's been justice involved, for whom this is very personal, you've talked to me about this artivist role and what that means to you personally. Can you say a few words about what it means?
So I always considered myself, well, let me reintroduce myself, right? Let me start over. Hi, everyone. I want to thank everyone out there for just being here with us in the space. I'm Minerva Mimi Pasquale. I use she, her pronouns, as Abby said. I am a associate of the Sing Sing Prison Museum, and that's one of my artivist way, right, of coming into this circle and how I became involved with not only Jo and Abby and Sean and Roberto, who I just met not so long ago, but it's all going back to my artivist world, right? I am an activist, but I always had a passion for the arts, whether it was writing, whether it was producing, and this was way before my incarceration. And so when I was incarcerated, the only freedom that I really had was my artistic freedom inside. It took me outside of the prison walls. It made me soften my own heart for people who were artistic inside. And, you know, whether I could speak the language or not, whether people said this person did this crime or whatever, when we were all, whether it was beading class, knitting, creating these beautiful arts, which some of them couldn't even articulate it in the language, but when we sat in our artistic world, right, it just became freedom. So when I came home, I really immersed myself in my activist world, but my production side and my creative side was always there. So this is the way now that I used it to kind of soften the blows for those who judge us, right? Not everybody can speak. And even when I do it with the Sing Sing Prison Museum, collecting oral histories, right? We always try to do it in a safe and in a brave space, in a place that we're gonna hold these stories and keep it for when we're long and gone. So for me, my artivist is a way of expressing of my activist world coming together. I know it was long-winded, but had to like throw it all in there.
I love it. I love it. And I love the phrase, you know, softening my own heart. I think that's beautiful. So thank you. So I want to turn now to restorative justice. And I'm going to guess that many of the people who are with us today have an understanding of that term. But I'm just going to, for those who don't, a pretty simple definition. Restorative justice is an approach to justice that typically brings together the offender of a crime with the victim of a crime, sometimes with others, but it's often just the one-on-one. And it's a process that through reflection and discussion tries to bring a shared understanding of the root causes of and the effect of a crime, of an opportunity to help bring offenders accountability for the crime, and while giving victims an active role in this process. It's an empowering role. And at its core, it's really about creating empathy and improving communities. But Jo, as you said to me, to all of us the other day, restorative justice is like a modern dance. It's as broad as modern dance. And you've been trained in restorative justice. You've been involved in another number of projects. Can you just tell us a little bit about what restorative justice means to you, and why you don't think we see more RJ programs?
Yeah, that's a great question, Abby. I think what I like about restorative justice is that it sees crime as a violation of people in relationship, and there is so much more hope in that for restoration and repair and change. It's not driven by punishment, but is measured by how successfully harm is repaired, is fixed, is changed. Again, very human-centered. I have had the gift of a residency with Community Works, who are an Oakland-based translational justice organization. And with Community Works, I've been able to participate in a restorative justice I'm going to say court, but it's really not a court at all, circle with a youth who committed what was effectively a felony crime, and was able to follow a pathway that did not put him into prison at age 16 that determined his next 30 years. And so that was very powerful. I've also been in what are called vicarious restorative justice circles, where the person who was harmed and the person who harmed were not necessarily both in the room at the same time, but the community intervened to be part of the tools used to shape accountability for the person who was harmed. And someone called a surrogate is used to represent the harm felt. And I've been in restorative justice circles that were driven by a feminist agenda with men in county prison in Oakland or in Santa Rita, where the agenda was really looking at undoing toxic masculinity and how that was a contribution. So that's, again, a different kind of restoration. And then I've been in community circles in my own dance community where there has been harm, often racially driven, often driven by the imbalance of power in dance communities between white artists and communities of color. So very abstracted from prison systems, but also deeply linked because prison systems are very rooted in racism. So those are just some of the things that I have participated in and studied and felt and wished that my partner, who was incarcerated for many years, had the opportunity to engage in. I wish that Mimi and Hilberto and Sean had the opportunity to engage in a different kind of accountability than what prison systems and criminal legal systems currently offer.
Yeah, absolutely. So Mimi, maybe share a little bit with us of kind of what you've seen of restorative justice. You know, what's your perspective of what we're seeing and not seeing?
Well, meeting Jo, to be honest with you, was the first time I even came around a circle, right? I was sharing with the group that I got arrested around 2008, went away around 2010, and it felt like they just threw away and locked the key and just shipped me from prison to prison to prison. It was never an experience of me reflecting on the harm that I did to my family, to myself, to the people that supported me and loved. I didn't even have a moment to reflect, really. And so when I met Jo and we kind of sat in that type of environment and circle, and it just gave not only myself, but the men at Sing Sing a moment to reflect. Like, hurt people do hurtful things and hurt others. And so what made us hurt? Why are we still hurting? So that way, when they do come home to their loved ones, it's not a pattern, or it's not something that's gonna, at least they know what's gonna trigger them, right? And how we can now identify what can be a trigger and how I can kind of pace myself, reflect, no, this is not the end all be all. And so I wish I did have that, Jo, but not all of us get that. And I don't know if they're doing it now. Maybe Sean can reflect a little bit how even we got into Sing Sing with you, because that was incredible. It was awesome.
Yeah, it is, you're right, it is remarkable. I think the data is pretty clear that a connection between individuals, incarcerated individuals who've suffered trauma it's tightly linked, and so to not have something that tries to address that is a bit astounding to me. Yeah. But Mimi just asked a great question of Sean. So Sean, can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of RJ and the prisons and in Sing Sing himself?
Yeah, I will just say too that when Jo and the team were here preparing for the show, Jo thought, well, maybe I could also get to meet the students. And the pandemic, we didn't get a chance to get into the prison, but we still met with a handful of the students just virtually. And when Jo and Abby and I talked about preparing for that meeting, none of us really knew, like, what are we walking, like, it was kind of a scary moment of, we're about to throw 6 performers, a handful of the board members, Joe and I think it was 6 6 currently incarcerated men into a room, and hoped that the conversation would stay on track. Like for me, I remember saying to Joe, like, we have no control over this meeting. And Joe wasn't worried. Joe was like, we got this. But it was incredible. And Gilberto was in the office that day and jumped in on that meeting too. But we just had a casual conversation that got very serious very quickly. There were tears, there was laughter, and at the end, a bunch of virtual hugs while we left that meeting knowing that there could be something more. And if we can get that kind of reaction with a meeting that took us 3 phone calls and 20 minutes to set up, like, why can't we see more of that healing work on a regular basis? And I know that Joe is continuing that work with the performance coming up to also come back and visit the prison again. Like, this is such a cool moment to learn from just this casual beginning work to how do we continue it.
Yeah, that's great. And Sean, the other day you also shared with us, and we're gonna circle back a little bit more on that and really kind of to use a horribly overused word, unpack that circle a bit more. But you also shared with us that what you're seeing, and correct me if I'm wrong, what you're seeing happening in the prisons is really things that's organically happening. It's coming from the men and women who are on the inside, and trying to also bring in the voices of those who are the corrections officers and others who aren't normally part of that conversation.
This is going to sound like such a crazy statement, but I was lucky to be in Sing Sing at the time when the warden was really proactive in a lot of these things, like offering a school and college and vocational trades. And I just had dinner the other night with Brian, who was the warden at the time, and Elaine, who was the warden at Bedford at the time. And they were casually talking about going against what the prison system had written, the mandates, that there wasn't allowed college at the time. And they were just ahead of their time and progressive and broke their own rules and offered college. And then that really led to other facilities with wardens brave enough to say, well, we'll break our rules here too. And it grew from Bedford, where the women created it, to Sing Sing, where the men grabbed the torch and ran with it, to now being not just in 25 jails in New York, but we've now helped states all over the country replicate or grow with that model that came out of the women's facility at Bedford. And some of those women now are leaders in the country, from Columbia, their center, the Center for Social Justice at Columbia, and leading this charge to that prisons don't have to look like they've always looked.
Yeah. So maybe this is a good point. We're going to switch up the order here a little bit. Hope you guys will go with the flow here with me. But since we're really starting to dig in a little bit here already to that circle, Joe, from the beginning, that circle was a part of an important part of your development process for Apparatus of Repair. And it's almost 2 years ago that you and I had our first call about this. And if it wasn't in that first call, it was definitely in that second call. And I'm incredibly grateful that, for partners like Sean, who really helped identify a collaborator on the inside for you, and make this circle possible. So Joe, maybe if you could just tell us why this is so important, why that circle is so important to you, and having that collaborator and what you guys did together, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, well, Apparatus of Repair is the third in a trilogy of dances, subtitled Dismantling the Prison Industrial Complex, One Dance at a Time. And throughout what's going to be 7 years of the trilogy, it's been really important to me that currently incarcerated and formerly incarcerated voices lead the development of the projects. And that is a lot of why we are here. We are on a panel where 4 of us are systems impacted, myself through having an incarcerated loved one, and Gilberto, Mimi, and Sean by being incarcerated. And so to create the project without voices of the incarcerated was not an acceptable creative platform to me. And Sean has been amazing in like weaving his way through all the rules to get us into connection. I do want to name Joseph Wilson as my lead partner from Sing Sing. We also connected with 3 formerly incarcerated folks in San Francisco. So this has been a cross-country and national endeavor. And I think that sometimes one of the things I've discovered is that folks who are currently incarcerated might not have been thinking about what alternatives exist because they don't know, because that's not what's in front of them in their hallways, in their cells, in their daily lives. And so it's just been quite a blessing to get that inside and outside conversation going. And Sean keeps saying it was casual and simple. It was, and it wasn't. I mean, it took like 2 years to set up, and then it was casual and simple. And I just remember when the circle was done, how this palpable connection I felt with Sean, because I could feel, because I know him better than anyone else in the room, and I could feel the excitement that this worked, and this is a beginning. What I'd really like to do is open the mic to Mimi and Gilberto, just to ask you all, how did that circle that we did together, because you were the 2 folks with Sean who participated, who were already out, how did that sit with you?
I was gonna pass it to Gilberto because we haven't heard from him, and only because, let me tell the audience this, don't think I'm just passing you the mic, Gilberto, because he impacted me in the circle because of the connection that the men, like I cried too. I feel like crying now, even just speaking about it, because when the men seen Gilberto, like, dude, you was just with us not too long ago, and now like, look at you and look at all the wonderful things he's doing, and even like still giving his time to them. It was just, that right there had me like that. At the end, we were all crying. So that's why I'm passing it to you, Gilberto, first, and then I'll take it back.
Oh my God, thank you, thank you. I'm laughing because it's like what you said is correct. It's like when I'm sitting there and the guys are on the screen and a monitor, hundreds of like a mile or 2 away in a little room with a camera, and they're looking and they're like, wait a minute, I know that guy. He looks familiar. And they were like so shocked. And it was like an emotional experience because I'm out here, I'm still with you. I'm trying to like pull them towards me. So it was a very, very beautiful moment. And then with the dancers and Joe, it was spectacular because it was more than a circle, because it was gathering people together in a room and having each other talk from the heart, their stories, their narrative, their personal narratives, and there was a lot of sharing and connections, because the connections came from a part where individuals didn't just feel like I was alone anymore. It was more like, wait a minute, we're all together. We all feel the same way, and we all see the same things. So we're more than just individuals. We were a collective, and that was such a beautiful moment for me. I'm trying not to be too long-winded. I'm sorry.
I know we're short for time too, because look, we've been talking and it's almost 8 o'clock. But to Jo's credit, Abby, that you wasn't there with us, but she had a wonderful moderator, facilitator, who, because it wasn't like, I don't want anybody to think like, yeah, we all came in there and it's a bunch of hardened people that we don't know each other and they just spilled the beans. No, Jo has a great team that led us in just really centering ourselves, coming together, creating a safe, brave space. And then we spoke about things that you would never think about, whether it's a ring or a circle. And we related it to really personal things. And then it just opened up the room and allowed everyone to connect, right? And so, it was very authentic, very genuine, very safe and brave. And I just want to commend you, Jo, because you You had a great team that created that space. So even like going to different facilities and doing this type of work, you have to have that type of team, because it's not easy. Roberto will tell you, Sean will tell you, we're not sitting there just because, yeah, we got nothing else to do, we're just doing time. No, your time becomes very special in there, and even getting the right team of men to go in there and to be open to share, right? Because we don't know if they're gonna share. They might be just come in there, let me just listen. And no, they wanted to connect with us. They wanted to continue the work. And so, Sean, that was a dart on you, because that you have to let us to continue the work. and Sean did a great job leading us there. And I wish it can be more, because I know for a fact that it'll help them when they get home to really know what triggers them and what didn't. And this is something that we don't think about, right? And we try to keep that and carry it with us. So that's how I felt, Joe.
When we got permission to host Joe's team here in New York with the video conferencing equipment from Sing Sing, it is the first time that had ever happened in New York. So that opened, aside from it being an incredible circle and a great meeting, it opened the door. So last week, the Commissioner of Corrections allowed us to have the same type of meeting with Breon Bain performed lyrics from Lockdown at the Apollo, and we live streamed it. So now that that door is open, these events can continue, and folks can understand that this technology is helpful. And then the day after the show, and by the way, when we looked at venues, the Broadway theater venues would not do anything that live stream, which meant that the currently incarcerated men couldn't participate. So finally, the Apollo got involved and said, we will break our own rules and live stream so that the men and women that are incarcerated in the country can watch it. Over 1,000 incarcerated men and women watched this show, including the women at Bedford and the men at Sing Sing. And the warden at Sing Sing already said, Columbia University hosted it. We need to do this. This needs to be an annual event. And it's just this ripple effect of opening these doors and including these people and having these performances really touch everybody. Breon and his producer came the very next day after a week of preparing 2 shows. The very next day came up and performed at Sing Sing for the men that watched. It was incredible.
That's great. Joe, I know you're gonna touch a little more. Can you, when you do it, maybe share with folks, a little bit of the design of this conversation, because it was carefully designed by you and Joseph, your collaborator.
Yeah, so Joseph and I took on the overall design, but I do want to name Maddie Clifford, who is the composer on the project, but also a poet and someone who leads youth in the juvenile justice system in San Francisco through writing processes. So Maddie is who Mimi was talking about when she was talking about our team. And one of the things I like about restorative justice circles that I've been in is they're not always head on. They're not always, what did you do? Why did you do it? They come at the issue sideways. And so the question that Maddie asked all of us was, name an artifact that is physical or emotional that you want to pass on to people that come after you, who you consider your families, that have been passed to you through your ancestral line or familial line. And then we answered the opposite question of what is something that has been passed on to you that you do not want to pass on. But one of the answers that was shared by both Sahad Lavech, one of the dancers, and one of the residents at Sing Sing was quilting. And so the image of quilting has come in to the piece. And it's one of the fabrics, no pun intended, of the vocabulary of the dance. And that's just one example of where art takes something and takes off with it. Something else that came in that one of our women in Oakland talked about was, she served a 27-year sentence, and she said, and this is something Sean has said too, is that it took her 12 years to look in the mirror and say, wow, this is what I did. And so we have a whole section of the piece that's about looking in the mirror. And so that is a focus on personal accountability. But when we look at prison systems, we also have to look at systemic and state accountability. So contrasted to that moment of looking in the mirror with two dancers is an overlay of text from a grandfather whose child was killed in Uvalde in the school shootings. And it was a controversial decision, but we decided to contrast this idea of individual responsibility with state responsibility for violence. Because the absence of gun control, the absence of assault weapons ban, the absence of any kind of check on guns is part of what needs to change as we look at prison systems. And so those are just two examples of how the circle processes created the art.
I love it. Daring, difficult choices that obviously you had to make. I did get to observe a little bit, and I too remember Gilberto's first seeing the men and the men first seeing Gilberto, and what a beautiful moment. And also just at how at the end of the day, there's such, those questions, Jo, that you asked, and that this was grounded around, are just such a reminder that there is so much more that is similar between us than is different, and that's really moving. Kind of shocking that we're getting close to the time we need to begin to wrap up. So Jo, let's bring it back to Apparatus of Repair. And can you tell us, you've already told us a little bit about, the quilting and how that's founded in the fabric of the piece. Can you tell us a little bit more about, how this experience has influenced the work, and then what audience members who I hope are going to come join us on October 6th, 7th, and 8th in Ossining to see the performance, because it's really nothing like seeing this in person. But I hope, what should we be looking for when we come see it?
Well, in the beginning of the project, as I worked with Sean Riley, who's the set designer, we really hung on to the phrase reimagining public safety. It's a phrase that invites you in. It's not threatening the way defund the police or prison abolition are as phrases, though for me, they often mean the same thing. And so reimagining meant that we created a set of pieces of steel objects, apparatus, that are all new. They're not something where you look at them and say, oh, that's a chair, oh, that's a door. They are invented objects. They don't have any other reference point besides themselves. And that also allows the audience to interpret the objects as they want to. And we've already had some amazing interpretations of why the objects exist as they do. I'll say one thing, which is that we worked with 9-foot poles, and those poles have multiple purposes. Sometimes they're the prison bar. Sometimes they're the boundary between one who harmed and one who caused harm. Though one of the things that the circle at Sing Sing revealed is that's a very false boundary, because most people who are behind the walls have been recipients of harm themselves, and that has translated into behavior that that the state deems as criminal. I would also say harm comes in the form of poverty and community disinvestment. The Prison Policy Initiative just released a report last week that was created with SE Justice Group called The Geography of Mass Incarceration, and there was a very direct overlay between poverty, community investment, and where people are incarcerated from. And so when we think about harm, to me, it's very important to think both individually and systemically. And the piece does allow us to do that. Now, Abby, I completely forgot your question. Oh, what's the audience going to see? I think that there's some hard things. One of the things that we wanted to do was make the piece survivor centered. So the ending section is really the story of a survivor of sexual violence. And that story belongs to one of the dancers who created some of the material for the piece, and then unfortunately had to drop out because she is dealing with a family illness and was unable to continue. But it was really important to me, and something that restorative justice does is center the story and the need of survivors as its primary focus. And so we decided to end the piece with that story. I think having done the piece now in San Francisco for a few shows, audiences love the music. They're intrigued by the set. They love what the dancers bring. They love the risk, and they love the intimacy. So hopefully audiences will see all of that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jo. And I hope everybody saw those gorgeous photos that were being displayed as Jo was telling us what we should be looking for. Those are from the current production, which is out at UC Hastings in San Francisco. And we are obviously in for a real treat. We have a question, if folks are ready, and the first one, Jo, is for you. So I'm an art student who believes in the role of arts and of the arts and responsibility of the artists in social change. But often I would hear artists talk about art for art's sake, and how if art were made to deliver or facilitate a social message, it will cease to be art or somehow be less artistic. But every time I see or hear projects like this and the impact it made on the community, I feel so moved and inspired. I feel that this is still true art. Have you ever faced this criticism, and could you advise me on how to make sense of this? Great question.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like the pendulum has swung a lot since the George Floyd murder, and since the protests in the street that evolved, and since the call for racial reckoning in the arts has grown really strong. I feel like there is more and more invitation and almost obligation for artists to be socially engaged as we create our work. And interestingly, within that, I think it's really important to hold two roles, which is to be rigorous in your artistry, and simultaneously, if you choose, to be rigorous in your community connection. And so I do feel like the pendulum has swung a lot. When I started doing this work 26 years ago, I was one of very few dance artists working in coalition. I like to feel like as an artist, as an arts organization, we lead the building of coalitions, and then we leave the coalition behind, and so that the apparatus for political movement building is still in place. So that's one way that I think about what I do. But I would say if anybody shuns you as an artist, you just have to ignore them, because artists don't make money. We don't have a lot of status in society. We're at the bottom of the parade of the muses, so to speak. And so do what you love. Do what matters to you. I think that's really the most important thing, because in the end of the day, you don't have very much at the end. All you have is how you feel about your work. And so I would just encourage you to do and to learn what it is. There's a little trial and error, but to learn how to do what it is you love and what matters to you.
Yeah, beautiful. And I think as Mimi said earlier, of course, the process itself is therapeutic. It's a process of discovery, which is wonderful. I don't know. I mean, do any of our other panelists, Alberto, Mimi, or Sean, want to respond in any way to the question?
I just wanted to, I know, Jo, you had said this is a trilogy, so we have more to come. And I know you showed us in the circle, like the past work. So I don't know, maybe people can purchase it, see it. I want more information about what's coming and the first part of this work. I think I want more.
Thank you, Mimi, for that. And actually, we kind of jumped right in. So, Jo, do you want to we've got a few moments. Do you want to take a moment and just tell folks about the first two pieces of the trilogy.
Yeah, this is actually the third in the trilogy. So it's for now the final element of the trilogy. The first piece was looking at the experience of women with incarcerated loved ones. It was called The Wait Room, and it actually was brought to Ossining by the Sing Sing Prison Museum, which was deeply thrilling. And we performed within spitting distance to the prison, right in the park that's right next to the prison. Some of the COs from the prison came. Some of our crew was hired because of Sean, one man had just been out like a few days, and I'm like, can the guys hear us? Can they hear the music? And unfortunately, the answer was no, just because of the geography of the thing. But anyway, that piece toured most recently to New Orleans, and now it's retired. The second in the trilogy asked the question, how can Black and Jewish voices amplify the call for racial justice via an end to mass incarceration? I am a Jewish person, and when I would go visit my husband and was locked in between the two gates where you walk in and the door locks and the other door hasn't locked and you're sitting there, I really had the genetic memory of what a Jewish person feels around being locked in and caged, which is quite threatening when we think about the history of pogroms and the Holocaust and all of those things. And so there is a long and complicated history of Black Jewish collaboration and difficulty and collaboration again. And so I wanted to lend my voice toward that collaboration. And our primary partner was a man named Rassan Thomas, who works from his cell in San Quentin and who was literally just paroled about 2 weeks ago. Not paroled, but he was told he's going to be paroled in 150 days. So, and now we are looking at, well, if not prisons, then what? How do we hold people accountable? It's also a feminist question, a Black feminist question, an intersectional feminist question. How are women safe when there is a lot of violence against women? That is a very real thing. And I think that's the trickiest question in all of this that for me, I don't feel like I've answered as fully as I would like. And some of the women in the company are survivors of sexual harm and violent crime, and have ambivalence when I speak of prison abolition. We are not all on the same page. And I feel like in many ways, we are a microcosm of America in how the artists of the project feel about prison systems. And so it's been quite a blessing to work and hold that difficulty and still move forward and create what I think is a pretty powerful piece.
Thank you. And we've now got a number of things in the Q&A, and I know we're coming up on our time, but I just want to share from Jeannie. Thank you for bringing the Restorative Justice Circle to Sing Sing. My husband was a participant. He was very moved, inspired, and it was really heartfelt. He's grateful for being a part of this special session. It was a success and would love for this to continue. Sean, and the rest of us here. Let's see. Thanks again for all of your amazing work. I look forward to seeing your show. We then had Renee Davis. I don't have a question, but I'd like to say thank you guys for allowing the men inside to have a sense of freedom. This is Joseph Wilson's wife. Thank you, Renee. Jeannie says, hi, Gilberto. It's great seeing you with Javier. And of course, Sean, you are simply amazing, which we know and amplify 1,000,000 times over. So let's see, Jo, Gilberto, Mimi, Sean, thank you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and your insight with us. Gilberto, thank you for being a part of this. Brent, thank you for hosting this on the museum's platform and getting us going and being a sponsor of the production. I also want to thank Anna Adler of the Sing Sing Family Collective, and Joseph, who's a co-founder of the collective. They also have curated, I can speak, an exhibition called From Love, which is an exhibition focused on human relationships, familial, romantic, and other through the lens of incarceration. And that it will be on display at Bethany, coincident with the performances themselves from October 8 to November 5. If you're coming to the performance on the 8th, you might want to come to the opening, which is a little bit before, maybe bring a snack, have something to eat, and then stay for the production itself. And then, of course, I have to acknowledge the amazingly generous support of the National Endowment for the Arts, the New York Council on the Arts, the New England Foundation for the Arts National Dance Project, the Association of Performing Arts Professionals, APAP Forward, Arts Westchester, Humanities New York, the Sing Sing Prison Museum, and Hudson Link for Higher Education. Please check our website, register. The tickets are free. We welcome donations, but we've had such a wonderful sponsorship that we are happy to be able to make these free and welcome everybody. So thank you all. Brent, thank you, and I turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Abby and Joe and Mimi and Alberto and Sean. Sean mentioning Brian Fisher, I should also recognize that Brian is also a member of the board of the Sing Sing Prison Museum. So we work really closely with the people who have been pioneers in challenging the norm. And it does remind me that as a historian, I have to mention Thomas Mott Osborne, who served as the warden at Sing Sing back in the 19-teens, very briefly, but he created something that challenged the norm at that time. And the Osborne Association is named for him. And so I think there's a lot to learn, but I want to close by saying, please go and see this performance by Jo Kreiter. It's going to be amazing, I assure you. And tell your friends to see it. That closes our program. Thank you, Abby, again, Bethany Arts Community. Thanks to all of you, and good night.